He lay there, quiet, trusting, and unquestioning. No cries of why or oaths of profanity left his lips. He made no screams of terror or mad dashes towards freedom. No, in simple, confident obedience and submission, he lay there, bound hand and foot, and waited. Waited for his father's trembling hand to drive the knife home to his heart. Many today would call the above scene an attempted murder, abuse of parental authority, violent, extreme, or worse. But in fact, there's something much deeper hidden behind the scenes. A lesson that each of us, no matter the age, nationality, race, gender, or culture, have the ability and privilege to learn. But let's back up and start from the beginning of the story. It had been a sleepless night. Abraham tried to push the message he had heard to the back of his mind. Take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Abraham mentally wrestled with himself. Surely it could not have been God asking him to do such a thing, but he knew it was. God had spoken to Abraham before, and he knew that the voice he had heard, the message he had heard, was from only one person, God himself. Finally, giving up on sleep, Abraham arose, shook Isaac awake, and they began their preparations to go to the land of Moriah and sacrifice there. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days of journeying passed by. Abraham sought the Lord in prayer, hoping against hope that there would be another message from heaven stating that it was unnecessary to sacrifice his son. But no such message came. So, in complete trust, Abraham pressed forward, Isaac by his side. At the bottom of the mountain, they left the servants behind. Isaac took the wood, Abraham the fire, and slowly but purposefully they trekked their way up the mountain. Soon they were at the top, and together they began to build the altar. Then a young man's voice shattered the silence. "Father," called Isaac. "Yes, here I am, my son," Abraham replied. "Where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Isaac questioned. Oh, how Abraham had hoped that that question would not be asked, at least not yet. But in trembling bravery, Abraham began to explain. I quote, "With terror and amazement, Isaac learned his fate, but he offered no resistance. He could have escaped had he chosen. The old man, exhausted with the struggle of those 3 terrible days, could not have opposed the will of the vigorous youth. But Isaac had been trained from childhood to ready obedience, and as the purpose of God was open before him, he yielded a willing submission. He was a sharer in Abraham's faith, and he felt honored in being called to give his life as an offering to God. Herein lies a lesson for each of us, a lesson it seems that we are oft too slow to learn. Abraham, through time and experience, had been trained to obey God's calls with no hesitation. Thus, he obeyed in going with Isaac to sacrifice in the land of Moriah. Abraham did not now understand why God had asked him to sacrifice Isaac, but he went forward in simple faith and trust, believing God to be wise and powerful enough to bring forth good out of that which seemed only bad. This obedience and trust Abraham had taught Isaac to profess as well. Thus he did not run away, did not falter in his love for his father or his faith in his father's God. Thus he was willing to become a sacrifice. The time had come. What was inevitable could no longer be put off. Quoting, the last words of love were spoken, the last tears shed, the last embrace given. The father lifted the knife. Suddenly an angel of God called out of heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" He quickly answered, "Here am I." Again the voice was heard, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." Then Abraham saw a ram caught in the thicket, and quickly he offered it in the stead of his son. In his joy and gratitude, Abraham gave a new name to the sacred spot, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Now, God, he really does provide, doesn't he? After such an experience, you wouldn't have been able to convince Abraham otherwise, nor Isaac. And yet, why did God provide? It is answered in the very verse I just read. Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Why did God provide? Because Abraham, in simple faith and trust, had not withheld his son as a sacrifice from the Lord. In short, Abraham, and Isaac too, had learned to obey God no matter what was asked of them. Let's stop and think for a moment. How many of us face tests of our own? Tests that may seem as difficult to bear as the one that faced Abraham or even Isaac. And yet, how often, unlike Abraham and Isaac, we falter, worry, complain, fret our way through the trials and tests, doubting God and his infinite wisdom, choosing our own way above a simple obedience and following of God's plans. Let us revisit the final terrible scene between Abraham and Isaac through the pen of Ellen White. She writes, Isaac is bound by the trembling, loving hands of his pitying father because God has said it. The son submits to the sacrifice because he believes in the integrity of his father. But when everything is ready, when the faith of the father and the submission of the son are fully tested, the angel of God stays the uplifted hand of Abraham and tells him that it is enough. This act of faith is recorded for our benefit. It teaches us the great lesson of confidence in the requirements of God, however close and cutting they may be. And it teaches children perfect submission to their parents and to God. By Abraham's obedience, we are taught that nothing is too precious for us to give to God. Oh, how many tests and trials in our lives would have end results so vastly different if only we would be willing to trust and obey the simple commands and requirements of our Heavenly Father. So in that light, how can we, just like Abraham and Isaac, be trained to obey our Heavenly Father no matter what he asks of us? Well, in Revelation 14, verse 12, it states that here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. First of all, we need an attitude, a mentality that is willing and ready to keep any and all of the commandments and requirements that God has given to us. And secondly, we need to have faith, a complete trust in our Heavenly Father, that when we do so, that is willing to keep his commandments, we may be assured that God will come through for us. It may not be in the way that we would like, but God will always, always come through in the way that is best for us. A quote from the Spirit of Prophecy that I've often heard repeated says that God never leads his children otherwise than they would choose to be led if they could see the end from the beginning and discern the glory of the purpose which they are fulfilling as co-workers with him. Abraham and Isaac found this statement to be all too true in their lives. What about us today? We must understand, though, that before Abraham could be tested in such a difficult matter as that of sacrificing his son, he was first tested in the little things. For example, Abraham was tested on his love for his wife, how willing he was to be honest, his patience in waiting for his son, etc. True, he did not always pass those tests with flying colors, but he did continue to grow, and so will we. For it is as we learn to be faithful in the little things, obedient in the little requirements that God has given us, that we can begin to trust him more and more until, like Abraham of old, we become willing to obey, trained to obey, no matter the cost to ourselves. We live in a culture vastly different than the one that Abraham lived in and Isaac grew up in. We are surrounded by easy access to everything we could ever want. There is seemingly no limit to the amount of movies, games, books, immorality, fashion, money that we may supposedly gain or enjoy when we do what everyone else is doing. Yet the lesson remains the same. God doesn't change. He is the same today, yesterday, and forever, and he is still pleading for our willing obedience to his requirements, a willing obedience that flows out of a deep love for him and gratitude for what he has done for us. Brothers and sisters, classmates, friends, how long will we compromise? How long will I compromise? Abraham chose obedience. Isaac chose obedience, and we too may choose obedience. If ye love me, Christ bids us, keep my commandments.